effects of environmental chemicals, water pollution, air pollution, the unhealthy lifestyles of teenagers spending almost 9 hours a day glued to their screens, all of this needs to be addressed. But for now, I'd like to focus on one of the key parts in all of this, one of the issues at the forefront, among the first batch of chemicals that could soon get banned in the United States, and that is artificial food colors. The report raised some serious concerns. Not only have we been eating and drinking chemicals that may be harmful to us, but it notes the food industry funds the bulk of research in the field. There are loopholes in the approval process and a lot of cross-pollination between key positions in big business and the approval agencies. It says that one analysis reported that 95% of the 2020 Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee members had financial ties to food and pharmaceutical companies. Think about that, 95% of the members. In 2024, the chemical manufacturing industry spent around $77 million just on lobbying. And this took place while 60% of their lobbyists had even previously held federal positions themselves. But this problem has deeper roots. It goes back to just after World War II. The agriculture system in most of Europe and Asia, it was destroyed. The United States stepped up to massively increase food production, and that was done mainly through mechanization. The use of synthetic fertilizers, methods to make sure that foods on store shelves don't spoil as much as fresh foods would. It was the start of ultra-processed foods, and a brand new food business was born. But while ultra-processed foods helped us to feed the world, while also living with a surplus, they also came with new problems. Backroom deals, bad studies, modern marketing, shareholder interests, chemicals to make that processed food not look as processed as it is. A lack of proper research has allowed us all to think things were safe that may not have been. And artificial food colorings have become the poster chemicals for this whole problem. Back to that Maha video from the campaign trail. RFK Jr. raised the alarm over how yellow dye number 5, tartarazine, found its way into our diets.
What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then a British chemist figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now.
So now that the first batch of research is out, what does the Maha report say? The section on food colorings, it's limited, but it states certain food colorings, such as Red 40, which is present in widely consumed products, have been associated with behavioral issues in children, such as increased hyperactivity and symptoms consistent with ADHD. Additionally, it says, preliminary evidence suggests a possible association between the consumption of food colorings and autism, although further long-term research is necessary to establish a definitive link. It seems the big problem with the studies is that there just haven't been that many of them, at least not with humans. The most concerning studies found the negative impacts of artificial food colorings. Those were on animal test subjects. Those are the ones often cited with the major long-term side effects. But there have been some limited studies just done on kids as well. A study in 2007 from Lancet found that artificial colors or a sodium benzoate preservative, or both, in the diet of kids did result in increased hyperactivity in 3-year-old and 8 to 9-year-old children in the general population. So, in other words, something that could get your child medicated and diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Another study from 2022 came to similar conclusions. This one from the Environmental Health Journal on the effects of synthetic food dyes found there is a relationship between food dye exposure and adverse behavioral outcomes in children. A 2020 report in Springer Nature says that since 2011, it is evident that dyes are linked to harmful effects in children. Food colors blue 1 and 2, green 3, red 3, yellow 5 and 6, citrus red 2, and red 40 can trigger many behaviors in most kids. Artificial food colors usually contain petroleum and is manufactured in a chemical process that includes formaldehyde, aniline, hydroxides, and sulfuric acids. Most impurities in food colors are in the form of salts or acids. Sometimes lead, arsenic, and mercury may be present as impurities. And it also says this: a study conducted at Southampton University in England found a link between food dyes and hyperactive behavior in children. The research does not prove, it says, that food coloring actually causes autism spectrum disorder, but there seems to be a link. So with all these concerns, how are these dyes still allowed for use? Well, if a kid gets diagnosed with ADHD, why don't doctors ask about their diets? Are they eating too many foods with chemicals shown to cause that problem? The issue again goes back to the lack of research. As that Springer Nature study says, at least as of 2020, the US FDA is yet to study the effects of synthetic dyes on behavior in children. They haven't studied it. And the other issue is many of the studies that have been done, they're limited. And they can say it is believed or studies suggest. But any hard conclusions, well, that would need to come from higher up. Although there are now some in movement. In January, just days before Trump was sworn in as president, the FDA banned one of these chemicals, red number 3. This is in response to a color additive petition from a few years before that. And it pointed to studies on the more shocking end of the spectrum. As I noted, the studies on the effects on kids, they've been limited. But the studies on animals, mice in particular, those are the ones that suggest artificial colors, they may be detrimental to our health. But while the FDA, they did ban red 3, and while it did cite those studies, it also seemed quick to write them off. The way that FDC red number 3 causes cancer in male rats does not occur in humans. Relevant exposure levels to FDC red number 3 for humans are typically much lower than those that cause the effects shown in male rats. Studies in other animals and in humans did not show these effects. Claims that the use of FDC red number 3 in food and in ingested drugs puts people at risk are not supported by the available scientific information. So in other words, they banned that one, they noted the research, but they were quick to state that there's just not enough research on humans to fully support the concerns.
There's culture.